And so here we are. I'm in New York. Gene, you're in California.
I am. I'm in San Jose.
Yeah. And so we have the plan here is, for us to make this a genuine conversation, kind of like around the breakfast table, so to speak, and so we have a loose framework, but we're happy to ditch it and kind of go where the conversation will take us. But we have some things. We have some images that we can share, and we have Morgan. Oh, by the way, thank you so much to the team, the amazing marketing and publicity team. There's Morgan and Melissa and Katie and Teresa, and they're just making all this happen, and they rock. And they don't. They've never treated a job like a job. They bring passion and inspiration, and like for this whole event, for sure, a ton of that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing they put this together so quickly.
So yeah, so quickly.
So do you want to start by talking about how we met? Oh, before, I also want to say thank you to everyone for being here. It really is awesome to gather as a community, even if we can't be physically together. It's nice to be together through technology.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about how you and I first met?
Yeah. Oh, there's a picture.
So when we did the run through yesterday, I was like, maybe it's not a good idea to show young Faith, like our young selves and our old selves on the same screen.
No.
Yeah, if my kids could see this, they would totally make fun of me for this.
Well, but you don't look any different, really.
Ooh, yeah, that's not what my kids say.
Yeah,
you just have more facial hair.
So we're going to start. So the plan is we basically want to start a bit with the personal and our connection, right? And we want to just get into there, and then kind of talk about life as it is now in this new reality, and the creative life in particular, and also to provide some useful things for the creative lives of others, if possible. But we're not setting ourselves up as experts by any means. But okay, should I talk about that what that photo connects to?
Sure. This photo was maybe taken a year and a half after we met.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. So so this photo is in Times Square, New York, at the National Book Awards. And the first time, Gene's American Born Chinese was the first book. Oh no, you know what? I want to be talking to you like the way you and I normally talk. Like I'm going into presentation mode. But okay, I mean, so here's what it's like for me remembering how I met you. So originally, I had signed up Derek Kirk Kim, and he was this prodigy comics artist who happened to be plugged into a whole scene of like these crazy San Francisco area talents, like comics people, mostly Asian American comics, like uber geeks.
That's right.
The talent. And so when I signed him up, I had seen his Same Difference comic, which I thought was like one for the ages. And then he sent me stuff, and it was at the starter for a second. I'm not even sure if we even had a name yet, but we're talking like 15 years ago or something.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. What I remember is I remember reading about an announcement. It was before any books had launched. I remember reading an announcement on one of the comic book news sites about For Second. And I think they had a few quotes from you, and I remember thinking, "Wow, this is you." The article talked about how you were aiming for this mix of American, European, and Japanese comics. And I remember reading that, going, "Wow, that sounds so amazing. I kind of wish I could be a part of that." And then maybe a couple months later, we were having dinner together in San Francisco with Derek. Whose Same Difference, I believe, is one for the ages. People who haven't checked it out ought to check it out.
Derek is an amazing. I mean, it sounds like he's been in animation and directing, actually, and some really cool stuff.
Yes.
But it sounds like he's not done with the comics world.
No, he's not.
But anyway, so Derek, he sent me this thing, and it was like his buddy Gene has this thing, and it's like 8 out of the 9 chapters. It was in black and white, and it was this little square book. And at the time, I was already getting flooded with submissions, and so I basically shoved it in the pile. And then Derek kind of hounded me for several weeks, and he was like, "So did you check out my buddy Gene's thing? Did you look at American Born Chinese? Did you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm getting to it. I'm getting to it." And then I was going to fly to San Francisco for that dinner you mentioned, and it was going to be with him and a couple other people who've since become first, second authors. And he was like, and at the last minute before I was about to leave, he says, "Look, take it on the damn plane, and if you don't read it, I'm not coming to dinner." and he basically, strong-armed me, and I read it on the plane, and I got chills. I got the whole thing, I felt like, and it didn't even have the final chapter, like it didn't, which is a pretty key part of the story. But I was like, as soon as we landed, I called Derek. I said, "Please bring this guy to dinner tonight."
It was that was an amazing dinner. It felt like it was the beginning of something, and it was. I think First Second's really become, like, you and your team have really built this home for stories, and for cartoonists. It's been awesome to see over the last decade and a half. I can't believe it's been a decade and a half.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah, and you know what's weird is, like, so the thing is, I mean, I fell in love with American Born Chinese, from the get-go. Like I was like, let's just publish this and whatever the ending is. And then when the ending came in, I was like, oh, the payoff is just beyond my hopes. But the weird thing was, like, I don't think it ever struck me as like, this is going to be a hit. I would more like, at the time, I mean, the first few years of First Second, everything was a shot in the dark, because we had to kind of learn. I grew up in France, so I had my bias. Like, I didn't grow up on Marvel and DC, or even like Image and Dark Horse. Like, I came to that much later. But so I grew up with the kind of the French stuff, which is good and bad. Like, when you're trying to publish into America, you need to learn what the American markets are, and what American readers read, and want to read more of, and you can shape that to some degree, but you also have to understand it. So for me, I was kind of like trying everything, and when that one came in, I thought, okay, this is awesome, and we have to do this, but who knows what's going to happen? It's like, and some of the things that I thought were going to be like, these are going to be some money makers, like, they tanked, and then some of the things that I just loved, but I had no sense, like, okay, there's nothing commercial I can tell here. Those are the ones that really took off, and in many ways started to define First Second. So anyway, so this photo, so when I met you right at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, you were basically doing the Comic-Cons with your friends, kind of piling into a hotel room together.
Yeah, it was like 12 people in one hotel room.
Right.
Yeah.
Like losing money, right?
And every time we put out a comic, we would lose money, for sure. Yeah.
And you're like, your photocopied zines and minis are. And
I still have a lot of nostalgia for that time, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. It was like sleeping on a hotel room floor was sometimes gross, but it was still also really fun. Yeah.
I mean, I think one way or another, people, paying your dues is a time that's also like, it's a kind of schooling you're giving yourself, and it's like, but then it's like, so we sign up, and this, like, 18 months later, maybe, or so, you and me are here in this.
Yeah, it was nuts. I had to rent a tux. That was nuts.
Yeah,
I never thought I would have to.
I didn't actually have a tux until that night either.
Yeah, to rent a tux to do something that was comics related back then felt really
strange, Yeah, I mean, it's like 1 minute you're. So anyway, so fast forward 18 months, and here we are in our tuxes at the National Book Awards, and the National Book Awards had never nominated a comic before. And some of these are people from the committee. There's Linda Sue Park. I wonder if, oh, and there's Tin. Sorry, Lark. I'm getting my. But yeah, so we have. I wonder if some of these people are actually here with us today. It could well be. But anyway, so that was the National Book Awards, and then a few months later, American Born Chinese wins the Printz, and this time it gets the gold, right? It gets the one, and it was like suddenly it was making history.
It was just I mean, I just think that there was a lot of momentum was building in American comics at that point, right? Like Mouse had won the Pulitzer in the early '90s, and then there was just, it just took a long time for everybody else to catch up with Art Spiegelman, I think, or for the not even like the world to catch up with Art Spiegelman, and then Craig Thompson's Blankets came out maybe in 2002, 2003, and to be honest, I think if the world was in a different place, or if the American comic book market was in a different place, that particular book would have gotten a lot more attention from awards committees, in the traditional book world. But I think For a Second was a part of this too. It was like all of this momentum was building in American comics, and then it kind of all burst in the middle of the 2000s.
Yeah,
and it brought us to the world that we have today.
Yeah, and I think the manga, the manga, it was kind of the peak. It was peak manga invasion,
it was
and
peaking
manga
right then. That's
flooding
right.
the markets, and it was like, Borders at the time was still like a force, and they were adding new shelves and bays for manga, and the thing with manga was really interesting because it was like suddenly comics reading in America, which had been really not in a great place for some time, suddenly switched, and like the gender switch especially, there was like suddenly it went from like 85% male readers, like aging male readers, so like something like 65% female readers, and like suddenly and a lot of them were growing up without reading. They weren't reading X-Men. They weren't reading Superman. They were, they were reading.
Yeah, they're reading Fruits Basket, and they're reading Naruto.
Yeah, totally. And those are like some of the people you see today, like Faith Hicks, and it's like there's a generation that came up with like a whole different idea of comics.
Yeah. We owe a good chunk of the future of American comics to that manga explosion.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, a lot of the stories that are kind of defined our current age of comics have really intense manga influence.
Yeah, I mean, you remember when we were first, like our first conversations, we'd talk about the three schools. And it's the American school, which is also has the kind of indie and the underground and that stuff, but it's mainly DC and Marvel. At the time, and then there's the European school, and there's the greats that have that, a lot of influence coming in from Europe, and then the at first Japanese, now kind of Pan-Asian comic school. But now it doesn't feel like you can talk about three different schools. Like
no, now it feels like there's a lot more bleed over. It's been great. It's been great to see.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, I think we'll look back on this time as like an incredible age for the graphic novel. Like it's already clear, but I think it'll be clearer even in hindsight. It's just a really vital form of storytelling, and it's being embraced. And it's
I think we're lucky. I think we're lucky to be a part of comics at this time.
Yeah.
So I guess we should talk a little bit about what our lives are like now.
Yeah.
So in March, I was supposed to go on book tour. I was going to do, I don't remember how many cities, like 11, 12, 13 city book tour. And then the night before the day before I was supposed to get on an airplane, we ended up canceling. This was in early March, and I remember at the time feeling like it was like this really difficult decision, and then shortly after I did it, I think the NBA canceled their whole season. All this stuff started happening, and within a week, it felt like a no-brainer that I not go on this tour. So since then, like everybody else, we've been kind of scrambling to figure out how to do our normal things in a not normal world. So we, instead of doing the online book tour, I ended up doing a cartoon book tour on Instagram, which you can still see. So for every day I was supposed to be on tour, I ended up doing a comic strip, and it was all to promote this book that I've been working on for about 5 years called Dragon Hoops, my first nonfiction graphic novel about a high school basketball team in Oakland. So I followed them for the 2014-2015 season, did a 440-page book about that season. I don't know if you remember this, but when I proposed that book, it was supposed to be like 200 pages.
Yeah.
Just kept growing and growing and growing. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it turned into, I mean, it's interesting, with you, I feel like there's something strange about your path, it's like it's like you've got there's a destiny thing with you, like, and I feel like you're kind of following, one project to another. Like in some ways, this to me sits on the same bookshelf as Boxers and Saints and American Born Chinese. Like they're these books that together they make a kind of a story, but then each one is like both totally unexpected and has a weird continuity, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I feel like with this one, I mean, obviously your art, you have your visual handwriting and it's recognizably yours. But I felt like with Dragon Hoops, like I really love the way I feel like your memoir in a sense weaves through all of those projects, right? But here it's like consciously one of the strands, and you also have like the strand of like the history of basketball because you're researching it, right? Having started out knowing nothing about basketball. Which is awesome.
Yeah, well, I definitely, I was not a basketball person. I never thought I would spend 5 years of my life working on a book about basketball. I was not a good athlete at all. I was an anti-athlete when I was a kid. I had anti-talent. So
yeah.
That was definitely not in my plan, in my life.
Comics and athletics are not traditionally, connect. Although there's like Kurosawa's tennis.
Yeah, I feel like in Japan there's a lot, right? In Japan it's like this whole thing this whole category, whereas in America, I think we're just beginning to build it. So do you want to talk a little bit more about what you're working on?
I mean, I have a bunch of things at any given time, and I feel like part of the magic sauce of First Second is that so many of us on the team are also creators, and we have our stuff. I have. This is right here is my 5 Worlds series, which is this team project that's been like a really fun adventure with some teammates, including my brother and these 3 amazing artists. And the 4th book is coming out this May, and there's some news, there's some stuff happening with animation and stuff that we're hoping to be revealing soon, but. So that's going on. There's a number of things, and I feel, in some ways, First Second is a project, for me, it's a project. Like it's also a business, and it needs to be a good business in order to support its authors, and
Yeah. I think that's part of the problem right now, right? I think it was Art Spiegelman that talked about how he saw comics as this merging of art and commerce, and it kind of has to be in order to sustain itself. Yeah. But in the moment we're in right now, it does feel like the business side is being threatened in this really intense and historic way, and that has ramifications on the art side. So the reason why we have these slides up here, this is Hicklebee's. It's a store near where I live, and this is Books of Wonder, a store near where Mark lives. And then the next slide, this is Flying Colors, one of the premier comic book shops in America. The owner, Joe Field, invented Free Comic Book Day. If you've ever visited a comic book shop and gotten a free comic on Free Comic Book Day, you have Joe Field to thank. And Joe and I especially, we're friends, so I will, email him from time to time to see how he's doing. I kind of think of him as a bellwether of the comic book retail side.
Yeah.
And he's struggling. He says that this past month, March, was 90% down compared to the month before, compared to the March the year before, right? So if Joe is 90% down, it just doesn't say good things about the comic book market as a whole. And I think for a lot of us, even as creators who are not directly involved in retail, I think it causes a lot of anxiety. So I don't know about you, but I've like stayed up at night thinking about comic book shops. Like, what happens if all the comic book stores in America kind of, collapse? And it feels really freaky.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's hard not to. I mean, I think there's that's for a little later. It's a big unknown, and I think the truth is we're into an event that's like it's beyond our particular community, our particular trade, our particular passion. It's like the human race is facing something together, and and the coronavirus is one part, but then I think even with like hopefully a swift outcome, which is not looking super likely, right? On the coronavirus part, the economic kind of ripples and consequences are it's going to be for a while, like, and I think one of the things I've noticed, I mean, we just had with Macmillan, we're lucky to have some really good people at the top at Macmillan, and it's, there's been a humanity, but also a transparency and a clarity that's been, like, at a time like this, has been really, really good for everybody. And we had this town hall with John Sargent, who's the head of Macmillan USA, you know him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he's basically, they're trying to strategize and to look ahead as like, okay, how do we keep everything going for 12 months? But beyond that is an unknown.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of a recognition, which I find, it's kind of sobering, but it's also extraordinary, but it's like there's going to be a new normal.
Yeah.
We're not going back. Like, there's no, I think, I don't know about you, but I had a feeling at first was like, okay, this is weird. This is going to take getting used to. This is, the lockdown and the quarantine thing. But it's like there was a sense of me, treating it like a blip.
Mm-hmm.
At first, which was like, okay, when do we go back?
Yeah.
And I've had that with other events of the last few years, where I feel like things happen, and like politically and worldwide, and you're like, when do we go back? And it's like, we're not. So I think with the comic shop, I think it's good for us to be talking about this and to be looking for ways to support, like, not just comic shops and independent bookstores. Weirdly enough, barnesandnoble.com used to be a totally useless kind of outlet. There was like the Barnes and Noble store, but now suddenly barnesandnoble.com is a working thing.
That's great. That's great to have multiple channels, right?
Yeah.
And not just one dominant.
Right. I mean, for the business itself, and like, what's clear is people need books.
Yeah.
I think real story is a food. It's like, it's a necessity. It's not actually, it's part of how we make sense of the world. It's part of, our shared language. So that's not going away. And I think there's like these curbside pickup deals that bookstores are doing. There's like some really creative, enterprising stuff. And so I don't know about you, but my feeling is definitely nervous for the kind of short term, medium term, but I'm optimistic about the long term. But I think it's
I'm trying to get there. I'm definitely trying to get there.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think Joe, for example, he is doing curbside pickup, and a lot of the retailers, a lot of the book community are doing some really creative things, I think, in response to what we're going through. I do want to give a shout out to a specific hashtag. There's a hashtag that's creators for comics. The 4 is the number 4. And if you go and search on that on Twitter, you'll find all of these auctions of comic book creators putting up artwork, and all of the proceeds are going to be donated to the Mink Foundation, which is this foundation that's all about making sure our independent bookstores and our comic book shops survive.
Yeah.
So, but like you said, I think that there is going to be something permanent that comes out of this, right? And as dark as things kind of feel right now, we do have to focus on the good parts of what that future is going to look like, you know, to kind of push things in the right direction.
Yeah.
And you know, I have a brother-in-law who's a doctor. My own brother, my biological brother, is a doctor. And as a cartoonist, especially at this time, it just feels like what I can do seems so small compared to what they're called to do. But I do think each of us is kind of given a sphere of care, and in this time, we just have to figure out what's the best way to care for our sphere of care.
Yeah.
So do you want to move on to talking about maybe what the blue skies are in this particular situation?
Yeah.
We have a couple slides up here. So this is Shanghai before our current situation. And on the next slide, this is Shanghai in our current situation. And I'm sure everyone's read news reports about this, right? About how over a lot of our metropolitan areas, we are seeing the sky bluer than ever before. And this is one of the silver linings of this particular crisis.
Yeah, I think it's more than a silver lining. I think it's like, it's an essential part of what is happening. It's like something is causing, you know, I think a set of things, a set of circumstances is causing, it's not just a pause, it's like a hit, a reset of some kind, right?
Yeah, it is a reset of
do we have the other ones? There's like LA and Mumbai, I think.
Yeah, this is LA.
LA, I mean, when was it?
This is Mumbai.
Yeah, Mumbai. So, you know, places where, you know, people haven't seen in like 10 or 15 years, they haven't seen a blue sky, are suddenly seeing a blue sky. And so our Mother Earth is definitely getting a reprieve here. And it's like we're being forced to stop like a number of things that were not sustainable, right?
Yeah. So what do you think that means just in our little world of comics? What are...
I mean, I think there's a few angles into that thought. Like, you know, so I remember on 9/11, right, walking down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, between like the first tower had fallen and the second tower was about to, and I remember walking by a newsstand, and I don't know if you remember, but like I remember the days before 9/11, there was like a whole thing about sharks. There was like a whole hype about, you know, shark fears in Florida or some stupid thing. And I remember seeing this newsstand, and there was like all these magazines, many of which are gone now, but all these magazines, and having this really weird moment of like, you know what, this is completely irrelevant. Like you flicked a switch and everything went irrelevant. And I feel like I think we're in an event here that's way, 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 way bigger.
Yeah.
Globally. And it's going to be, I think the outplay of this is going to be for quite some time. And it's interesting that, you know, I feel like some things are relegated out into like irrelevance. But so here's the thing is like and the reason I'm saying this is simply like, I feel like some of these projects that I'm working on, like the stuff with you that, you know, I take Dragon Hoops and it doesn't feel that. Like it feels like this is needed, like this has a vitamin and this has like some nourishment that matters in our time, you know, because I think part of what we're facing is about like our humanity and what we want humanity to look like, and human behavior and human what's important, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what you're exploring.
That's true. Yeah.
You feel, you know, and I feel so it's like the stuff I'm signing up these days for with First Second, like, you know, some of it is some of it has to do with world affairs or civics, and you know, but some of it is story, you know, and fantasy, but it feels like it has to be real.
I think that's true. I think that I mean, we're still so early in this process, right? It's hard to tell where things are going to land, but
Yeah.
but the kind of stories that we're going to be looking for, and the kinds of stories that we'll be drawn to, and the kinds of stories that we want to tell will definitely change
Yeah.
after this moment. And what you said about those sharks, I don't remember that at all. I don't remember that at all from 9/11. But I think that's exactly right. I think they're going to be. It's hard to tell what it'll be, but there will be things that felt important to us before this moment that are not going to feel important to us once we're through.
Yeah.
And I also think that there's something nourishing about stories in general. So for me, some of the ways in which I've been dealing with my own anxiety is by both working on projects, you know, working on stories for you and for a couple of other publishers, and also consuming stories, like reading other people's stories. I think both of those things make me feel a little bit less alone.
Yeah.
Even though I'm isolated, it makes me feel a little bit less isolated.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
have you as a creator found it hard to create at this time?
There's been times. There's been times. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that I feel is needed for creators, and it is probably true all the time, but I think for the creative life specifically, design a routine.
Mm.
To me, that's one of the keys to like both like mental health, stability, like having, you know, especially in times of chaos and turbulence, having like set wake up and go to sleep times. It sounds kind of silly sometimes to say, but it's incredible. I find designing a morning routine where you actually kind of run up to your day. And I feel like, you know, over the years, I've worked with many creators, and I would say, without any judgment in this, but I feel like they fall into, broadly speaking, these two categories of like the ones who figured this out and the ones who haven't. And the ones who haven't tend to go from crisis to crisis and have a hard time being consistent. And then there's others who kind of built a kind of platform, you know. And I know we had some books we were going to recommend and stuff for people, you know, and I had one, Atomic Habits is one book that's it's a tool. These are some books on storytelling. But, you know, and I feel like making comics is a great activity with kids at home, by the way, in these times. But these are tools for, you know, the creative life. I think the routine, like the morning routine, is one tool that can go a long way in these times. Because otherwise, I think it's hard. You know, some people get really unmoored and get.
I mean, I think it's easy to get unmoored at this time. Yeah. I'm really into routines too, but I do think that with the kids at home and with without like a school to rush to, it does feel sometimes that it's hard to keep that routine. I mean, our bedtime is getting later and later.
We have
to reset. We have to reset. But I think you're right. Like, you have to figure that out, right? Like routine will give you a sense of sanity in a very strange time. But what I also think that you have to have a certain amount of mercy with yourself in order to, like, if you have a day where the routine just goes, you have to be okay with that and be willing to try again the next day.
So I know there's been some questions, and I'm trying to find the link to that. But actually, I'm saving a lot of the questions. Some of the questions people sent in are going to be for the 6th and final session of the day. But I feel like, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about some of your book recommendations. I think that would be a useful thing.
Sure. So that's further down in the slides. Let me see. I have a set of the slides right here on my desktop. So there are a lot of awesome comics that are coming out. These are all craft comics, right? And then those are some of my thumbnails. And then here's some of your book recommendations. You want to talk about these?
Yeah, well, Brian McDonald, actually, Old Souls. That's you and me. You actually got me into his book Invisible Ink, which I think is it's probably the book about writing and about storytelling that I've given to most authors. And he's preparing a nonfiction book for us, a graphic novel about storytelling called The Land of the Dead, with Toby Cypress doing the artwork. It's going to be absolutely phenomenal. This one, Old Souls, is Les McLean. It's a marvelous story that seems to be about reincarnation, but it's actually about living in the present. Really good. And then Mike Cavallaro, Nico Bravo, we just sold to DreamWorks. That's going to be an animated series. It's a really marvelous project by Mike Cavallaro. Next is, these are some current goodies. The Golden Age, in fact, I have it here. This is like a big, beautiful, velvety thing by Ciro Pedrosa, and many people in the comics world know Ciro Pedrosa from Three Shadows, and he's just like an incredible artist. Secret of the Wind. Go with the Flow. Secret of the Wind, by the way, is this really amazing parable that relates very much to the creative life, to art versus commerce. Really powerful stuff and beautiful, beautiful artwork. Go with the Flow is this period book you're going to be hearing about in the next session. It's a really, really interesting book that's having an effect in the real world as we speak. And actually, let me throw, what's this? Oh, this is, these are some feminine hygiene products that have appeared in schools near here, thanks to my daughter's lobbying after reading Go with the Flow. So we wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, so comics has a real effect on the actual world, which is awesome. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I hope they'll talk more about that when you get to meet with Lily.
Yeah.
And what have we got next? We probably put in too much stuff in ours.
Yeah. So these are some book recommendations. Again, because reading has been a way for me to feel a little bit less isolated in isolated world. These are some books that have helped with that. Bitter Root is it's like a fantasy story about an African American family who creates these potions out of roots, and these potions basically are a remedy for hate. It's way better than my description there. You should definitely check it out. Harley Quinn is by our beloved Mariko Tamaki. It's part of the DC Comics Young Adults line. And Flintstones is one of the best comics that I've read in a few years. I mean, it's surprising, because it's Flintstones, but it's so deep. It's amazing. Yeah. So on the next slide are more books from the DC middle grade and young adult line. Some of these folks, I think, are being published by Macmillan, right? Like Shannon Hale, who did the Wonder Woman book in the middle. She's
yeah.
We have
real friends with her. Yeah.
These are great. And then on the next slide are some first second books. I mean, I guess Phantom Twin and Check Please will be discussed at later sessions.
Yeah.
But I do want to highlight Mariko's book in the middle. Mariko and I are friends. I'll admit that. So, but even if we weren't, even if I disliked her as a human being, I think I would like her books. She's just incredible book. She's an amazing creator. Yeah.
And the artwork there, Rosemary's artwork.
Yeah, that just won a bunch of awards.
Yeah.
Right? Laura Dean just won a bunch of awards.
Yeah.
Deservedly so. So. Yeah. It's both. It's beautiful in both words and in. Again, books to make you feel less isolated in a time of isolation.
Yeah. That's awesome. So are you up for one quick question?
Sure.
I mean, you've answered one because Karina was asking any artists or illustrators that inspire you, and I think that's what we've been into. But there was one interesting question with Kristen Wald for you specifically. She said, when dealing with sensitive topics, how, like identity as in American-born Chinese or trauma, how does depicting the visual weigh against the text? What goes into deciding how graphic or direct the images will be?
Yeah, the shorthand that I use, and I don't think it always applies, it's not a 100% rule, but the shorthand I generally use is, I think of emotion through the pictures as more visceral and more immediate. It's almost like putting an emotion directly into your reader's gut, like bypassing their brain and going straight to the gut. Whereas emotion through words, I think of as more nuanced. It's you're filtering the emotions through the reader's brain before it gets to their gut. Yeah. That's just a general rule I have. So if I want something to feel super visceral, I'll try to put it through the image. If I want the reader to think about it a little bit more, if I want it to be a more nuanced emotion, I'll try to go through the words. Do you have something like that too?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like sometimes the process of scripting is going from this kind of like telling it to like staging and showing it, you know, and there's a journey there. But yeah, it's a good question. All right, we're being invited to wrap up here. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to. I mean, I hope we can land this on a place of hope. I think there is hope, and I do think the creative life is, you know, I think these are times like these can drive a person outwardly, you know, into panic, into fear, into the things you can't control, or they can drive you inwardly. And the creative life is very much there in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think for another project that I've been working on, I looked a lot at World War II, which is another trauma, very different from what we're going through right now. Yeah. But after World War II was a period of rebuilding, right? And I think that we're going to have to go through that too. We're going to have to go through a period of rebuilding. One of the things that we're going to have to rebuild is our culture, and the primary component of building culture is stories. So we have to keep working on that, right? This is going to change the stories that we tell. It's going to change the kinds of stories that we want to read. We have no idea really what those changes are going to be like. But the only way to figure it out is to keep doing both of these things. Keep reading stories and keep making stories.
Awesome. Absolutely. Thank you, Gene.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
That was fun. That was good. I mean, I feel like this little kind of conversation could be the basis of many more.